Question 1. Research into the regulatory landscape of Ontario, Canada, reveals a scenario where a client, who has previously expressed a conservative investment approach and a desire for capital preservation, now insists on investing a significant portion of their portfolio in a highly speculative, unproven cryptocurrency. As an advisor registered in Ontario, what is the most appropriate course of action to uphold your professional and regulatory obligations? Option A. Advise the client that you cannot facilitate this type of investment and suggest they find another advisor who specializes in cryptocurrency investments. Option B. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand the rationale behind their sudden shift in investment preference. Clearly explain the extreme risks associated with speculative cryptocurrencies, the potential for total loss of capital, and how this investment contradicts their stated financial goals and risk tolerance, before offering alternative, more suitable investment strategies. Option C. Immediately execute the client's requested investment in the cryptocurrency to satisfy their demand and avoid potential client dissatisfaction. Option D. Proceed with the investment as requested, but document the client's instruction to protect yourself from future liability. Correct answer is B. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand the rationale behind their sudden shift in investment preference. Clearly explain the extreme risks associated with speculative cryptocurrencies, the potential for total loss of capital, and how this investment contradicts their stated financial goals and risk tolerance, before offering alternative, more suitable investment strategies. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated desire and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, particularly when the client's request could lead to significant financial detriment. In Ontario, Canada, financial advisors are bound by provincial securities legislation and industry-specific codes of conduct that prioritize client well-being over client demands that are demonstrably harmful. The advisor must navigate this delicate balance, ensuring compliance with regulatory obligations while maintaining client trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough assessment of the client's stated objective, followed by a clear and transparent explanation of the risks and potential negative consequences associated with their request. This approach prioritizes the advisor's duty to provide suitable advice and act in the client's best interest, as mandated by Ontario securities regulations and the ethical standards of professional bodies. The advisor must educate the client about the potential for substantial capital loss, the impact on their long-term financial goals, and the lack of a sound investment rationale. This involves a detailed discussion, potentially supported by written documentation, outlining why the requested investment is not suitable given the client's risk tolerance, financial situation, and stated objectives. The advisor should then offer alternative, more suitable investment strategies that align with the client's overall financial plan. Incorrect approaches analysis. Proceeding with the client's request without further discussion or assessment would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach disregards the advisor's fiduciary duty and the requirement to ensure suitability of investments. It exposes the client to undue risk and could lead to substantial financial losses, potentially resulting in regulatory sanctions for the advisor and their firm. Suggesting the client seek advice from another advisor solely to fulfill the request, without first attempting to educate and guide the client, is also professionally unacceptable. While referring a client is sometimes appropriate, doing so to abdicate responsibility for providing suitable advice is a breach of professional conduct. The advisor has a duty to attempt to resolve the situation by providing their own expert opinion and guidance. Implementing the request immediately without any attempt to understand the underlying motivation or to explain the risks is a direct violation of the principle of acting in the client's best interest. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to uphold the standards expected of a registered financial advisor in Ontario. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the client's request and its potential implications. This involves active listening, probing questions to uncover the client's motivations and understanding of the risks, and a thorough review of the client's financial profile. The next step is to assess the suitability of the request against regulatory requirements and ethical obligations. If the request is deemed unsuitable, The professional must clearly communicate their concerns and the rationale behind their assessment to the client, offering alternative solutions. Documentation of these discussions and decisions is crucial for accountability and compliance. Question 2. Which approach would be most appropriate for a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada, when a client expresses strong interest in a new, high-return investment product that the advisor believes may not be entirely suitable for their moderate risk tolerance and long-term financial goals? Option A. Proceed with the investment immediately to capitalize on the client's enthusiasm and secure the commission, assuming the client understands the inherent risks of market-driven opportunities. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive suitability assessment, thoroughly explaining the product's risks and potential downsides in relation to the client's stated objectives and risk tolerance, and only proceed if the assessment confirms suitability and the client provides informed consent. Option C. Recommend the investment, but downplay the associated risks and focus primarily on the potential for high returns to satisfy the client's immediate interest. Option D. Suggest a more conservative investment that aligns with the client's risk tolerance, even if it means disappointing the client's current desire for the high-return product. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive suitability assessment, thoroughly explaining the product's risks and potential downsides in relation to the client's stated objectives and risk tolerance, and only proceed if the assessment confirms suitability and the client provides informed consent. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a client with the strict regulatory obligations of a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada. The advisor must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure that all recommendations are suitable and in the client's best interest. Adhering to the Ontario Securities Commission, OSC, rules and the Investment Industry Regulatory Organization of Canada, IIROC, regulations. The pressure to close a deal quickly can lead to overlooking crucial due diligence or pushing unsuitable products, which are serious ethical and regulatory breaches. The best approach involves a thorough understanding of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment objectives, followed by a recommendation of suitable products that align with these factors. This approach prioritizes the client's well-being and complies with the fiduciary duty expected of advisors in Ontario. Specifically, it requires the advisor to conduct a comprehensive Know Your Client (KIC) process, assess the suitability of any proposed investment, and document all recommendations and client interactions meticulously. This aligns with OSC Rule 31-505, Registration Requirements, Conduct and Reporting, and IIROC Dealer Member Rule 20, Suitability. Recommending an investment solely based on the advisor's commission potential, without a thorough assessment of the client's needs, is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This prioritizes the advisor's financial gain over the client's best interest, violating the core principles of suitability and fiduciary duty mandated by the OSC and IIROC. Suggesting an investment that is complex or high risk without adequately explaining its implications to the client is also professionally unacceptable. This failure to ensure client understanding and suitability can lead to significant financial harm to the client and breaches of regulatory requirements regarding disclosure and client education. Pushing a client to invest in a product that is not aligned with their stated risk tolerance or financial goals, even if the client expresses interest due to market hype, is a direct violation of suitability rules. The advisor has a professional obligation to guide the client towards appropriate investments, not to simply follow their potentially ill-informed desires. This demonstrates a lack of professional judgment and a failure to act in the client's best interest, as required by Ontario regulations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of their regulatory obligations and ethical duties. This involves prioritizing the client's interests above all else, conducting thorough due diligence, ensuring full disclosure and client comprehension, and maintaining detailed records. When faced with pressure or conflicting interests, professionals must pause, reevaluate the situation against regulatory standards and ethical principles, and seek guidance if necessary, rather than proceeding with a potentially harmful course of action. Question 3. Governance review demonstrates that a financial advisor in Ontario is being pressured by a long-term client to invest a significant portion of their portfolio in a high-risk, illiquid private placement offering that promises substantial returns. The client is eager to capitalize on the perceived opportunity, but the advisor has concerns about the offering's transparency and the client's capacity to absorb potential losses. The advisor also notes that the offering falls under a prospectus exemption. Which of the following approaches best navigates this situation while adhering to Ontario's regulatory framework and ethical standards? Option A. Advise the client that the investment is too risky and refuse to facilitate the transaction, without providing detailed explanations of the risks or alternative suitable options. Option B. Facilitate the investment quickly to satisfy the client's immediate request, assuming the client's stated desire for high returns overrides the need for extensive due diligence and disclosure. Option C. Proceed with the investment as requested by the client, emphasizing the potential for high returns and assuring them that their long-term relationship mitigates any significant risk. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive suitability assessment. Thoroughly document the client's understanding of the private placement's specific risks and illiquidity, and ensure the client meets all eligibility criteria for the prospectus exemption, providing detailed disclosure of all material facts. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive suitability assessment. Thoroughly document the client's understanding of the private placement's specific risks and illiquidity, and ensure the client meets all eligibility criteria for the prospectus exemption, providing detailed disclosure of all material facts. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate financial needs of a client with the long-term regulatory obligations and ethical duties owed to the client and the broader financial market. The pressure to generate revenue can conflict with the principle of acting in the client's best interest and adhering to the strict disclosure requirements of the Ontario Securities Commission. OSC. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing pressures and ensure compliance. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and documented assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment objectives, followed by a clear explanation of the risks and benefits of any proposed investment, including the specific risks associated with the private placement. This approach aligns with the OSC's mandate to protect investors and maintain fair and efficient capital markets. Specifically, OSC Rule 45-106 Prospectus Exemptions requires that advisors ensure clients meet the eligibility criteria for exempt market investments and understand the associated risks. Providing comprehensive disclosure and ensuring suitability are paramount to fulfilling the advisor's fiduciary duty and regulatory obligations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the investment without a detailed suitability assessment, relying solely on the client's stated desire for high returns. This fails to meet the OSC's requirements for investor protection and could lead to unsuitable investments, exposing the client to undue risk and potentially violating the advisor's duty of care. Another incorrect approach is to downplay the risks of the private placement to secure the transaction. This constitutes a misrepresentation and a breach of ethical conduct, as it violates the principle of full and fair disclosure. The OSC expects advisors to provide accurate and complete information, enabling clients to make informed decisions. A further incorrect approach is to proceed with the investment without documenting the client's understanding of the risks and the advisor's rationale for recommending it. This lack of documentation creates a significant compliance risk and makes it impossible to demonstrate adherence to suitability and disclosure requirements if questioned by the OSC. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a framework that prioritizes client well-being and regulatory compliance. This involves a systematic process of understanding the client's needs, evaluating investment suitability against those needs and regulatory criteria, providing transparent and comprehensive disclosure of all material risks and benefits, and meticulously documenting all advice and client decisions. When faced with client pressure or potential conflicts of interest, professionals must always refer back to their regulatory obligations and ethical duties, seeking guidance from compliance departments or senior management if necessary, rather than compromising on best practices. Question 4. The evaluation methodology shows that a driver's ability to anticipate and react to potential hazards is a critical component of safe driving. During a practical driving test in Derby, a candidate approaches a junction where a pedestrian is standing on the pavement near the curb, looking in the direction of oncoming traffic. The candidate, without any immediate obstruction to their path, slightly reduces their speed, and adopts a more cautious approach to the junction. Which of the following best reflects the examiner's assessment of this situation, according to the Derby Driver's Test syllabus and UK driving regulations? Option A. The candidate should not have slowed down as there was no immediate danger, and this indicates unnecessary hesitation. Option B. The candidate demonstrates good hazard perception by proactively anticipating a potential risk, even though the pedestrian did not step into the road. Option C. The examiner should ignore the pedestrian's presence as they did not pose a direct threat to the candidate's immediate path. Option D. The candidate's action is irrelevant as the primary focus is on successfully navigating the junction without incident. The correct answer is B. The candidate demonstrates good hazard perception by proactively anticipating a potential risk, even though the pedestrian did not step into the road. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that a driver's ability to anticipate and react to potential hazards is a critical component of safe driving. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the examiner to balance the need to assess a candidate's preparedness for real-world driving situations with the strict adherence to the Derby Driver's Test syllabus and the specific regulations governing driver licensing in the United Kingdom. The examiner must interpret the candidate's actions not just in isolation, but within the context of potential risks and the established standards of safe driving practice as defined by the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, DVSA. The best approach involves the examiner observing the candidate's behavior at a junction and making a judgment based on the candidate's proactive anticipation of potential hazard. This means the candidate should demonstrate an awareness of other road users and conditions that could lead to a dangerous situation, even if that situation does not fully materialize. Specifically, if the candidate slows down or takes a more cautious approach due to the presence of a pedestrian who might step out, or a vehicle that could emerge, this demonstrates a superior level of hazard perception and defensive driving. This aligns with the DVSA emphasis on developing drivers who can identify and respond to risks effectively, thereby reducing the likelihood of accidents. The syllabus prioritizes the ability to anticipate and react to hazards, and this proactive behavior, even in the absence of an immediate danger, is a strong indicator of this competency. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on whether an actual collision or near miss occurred. The examiner only marks the candidate down for not reacting to a situation that never became dangerous. They are failing to assess the candidate's ability to anticipate and prevent hazards. This overlooks the core principle of defensive driving, which is to avoid dangerous situations before they arise. Furthermore, if the examiner penalizes a candidate for being overly cautious when there was no immediate threat, this could be seen as discouraging safe driving practices. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the potential hazard altogether because it did not directly impede the candidate's progress. This would fail to assess the candidate's awareness of their surroundings and their ability to identify potential risks, which is a fundamental requirement of the Derby Driver's Test. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes the assessment of hazard perception and anticipation, as outlined in the DVSA guidelines. This involves observing the candidate's behavior in a variety of traffic situations, evaluating their awareness of potential risks, and judging their ability to take appropriate action to mitigate those risks, even if the risk is only potential. The focus should always be on the candidate's proactive engagement with the driving environment and their understanding of how to drive safely and defensively. Question 5. The evaluation methodology shows that a driver's ability to anticipate and react to potential hazards is a critical component of safe driving. During a practical driving test in Derby, a candidate approaches a junction where a vehicle on the right is approaching at a moderate speed. While the approaching vehicle is not clearly exceeding the speed limit or exhibiting obviously dangerous behavior, the candidate, perceiving a slight uncertainty in the other driver's trajectory, voluntarily slows down significantly and pauses briefly to ensure the other vehicle has safely cleared the junction before proceeding. This action, while not a direct response to a specific rule violation by the other driver, demonstrates a high level of caution. Considering the principles of the Derby Driver's Test, which of the following best reflects the appropriate assessment of the candidate's action? Option A. The candidate should have proceeded at a normal speed and only reacted if the other vehicle had clearly posed an immediate danger, as their hesitation could impede traffic flow. Option B. The candidate should be penalized for unnecessarily slowing down and stopping, as the other vehicle was not clearly violating any traffic laws, and this hesitation indicates a lack of confidence. Option C. The candidate demonstrated excellent hazard perception and defensive driving by proactively assessing the situation and prioritizing safety, which is a commendable aspect of their driving. Option D. The candidate's action should be disregarded as the other vehicle committed no infraction, and the focus should remain strictly on whether the candidate adhered to all explicit traffic rules. The correct answer is C. The candidate demonstrated excellent hazard perception and defensive driving by proactively assessing the situation and prioritizing safety, which is a commendable aspect of their driving. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that a driver's ability to anticipate and react to potential hazards is a critical component of safe driving. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the examiner to balance the need for objective assessment with the potential for subjective interpretation of a driver's actions, particularly when those actions are not explicitly covered by a strict rule, but demonstrate a clear understanding of road safety principles. The examiner must consider the overall context of the driving environment and the driver's demonstrated awareness. The best approach involves recognizing that while a specific maneuver might not be explicitly detailed in the Derby driver's test syllabus as a mandatory action in every situation, the driver's proactive decision to slow down and assess the situation demonstrates a superior level of hazard perception and defensive driving. This aligns with the underlying principles of the Derby driver's test, which emphasizes safe navigation and the avoidance of potential risks. The driver's action, though not a direct response to a specific rule violation by another party, shows an understanding of the potential for danger and a commitment to safety that is paramount. This proactive safety measure, even if it leads to a minor deviation from the most direct path, is indicative of a competent and responsible driver. An incorrect approach would be to strictly penalize the driver for not proceeding at the maximum permissible speed or for making an unnecessary stop, even if the stop was precautionary. This fails to acknowledge the driver's judgment and proactive safety measures. Such an approach would be ethically flawed as it punishes safe, albeit perhaps slightly unconventional, driving. It also demonstrates a failure to adhere to the spirit of the Derby driver's test, which aims to assess overall road safety competence, not just road adherence to specific rules in isolation. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the driver's action entirely and focus solely on the absence of a rule infraction by the other vehicle. This would be a failure of professional duty to assess the driver's hazard perception and decision-making skills in a dynamic environment. It would also be a regulatory failure, as it neglects a key aspect of safe driving assessment. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes the assessment of hazard perception and defensive driving techniques. This involves evaluating the driver's actions within the broader context of road safety principles, rather than solely focusing on strict adherence to individual rules. When faced with a situation where a driver's actions are not explicitly covered by a rule, but demonstrate a clear understanding of potential risks and a commitment to safety, the professional should err on the side of recognizing and rewarding that proactive safety behavior. This ensures that the evaluation reflects true driving competence and promotes a culture of safety on the roads. Question 6. The evaluation methodology shows that a driver applicant in Ontario, Canada, expresses significant confidence in their driving abilities and claims extensive practice, yet exhibits noticeable hesitation at intersections and a tendency to overcorrect steering during their road test. Considering the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's (MTO) regulatory framework for driver licensing, which of the following approaches best reflects professional and compliant evaluation practice? Option A. The examiner prioritizes the applicant's self-reported experience and confidence, and passes the applicant if their overall demeanor suggests they are likely to be a safe driver, even if minor procedural errors were noted. Option B. The examiner provides immediate verbal feedback and gentle guidance during the test, suggesting corrections to the applicant's steering and approach to intersections to help them demonstrate better control. Option C. The examiner considers the applicant's stated confidence and practice, and allows for some minor deviations from perfect execution due to perceived nervousness, focusing more on the overall impression of safe driving. Option D. The examiner meticulously records all observed driving actions, noting specific instances of hesitation and steering corrections against the official MTO scoring criteria, and bases the pass/fail decision solely on this objective performance data. Correct answer is D. The examiner meticulously records all observed driving actions, noting specific instances of hesitation and steering corrections against the official MTO scoring criteria, and bases the pass/fail decision solely on this objective performance data. Explanation: the evaluation methodology shows a critical juncture for a driver applying for a license in Ontario, Canada. The scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the examiner to balance the applicant's perceived confidence with objective assessment of their driving ability, while strictly adhering to the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's MTO Driver's Handbook and examination procedures. Misjudging the applicant's readiness could lead to issuing a license to an unsafe driver, posing a risk to public safety, or unfairly denying a license to a capable individual, causing frustration and potential financial hardship. The best approach involves the examiner meticulously documenting all observed driving behaviors against the established MTO criteria. This means focusing solely on the applicant's performance during the test, noting any errors or areas of concern, and comparing these against the official scoring rubric. The regulatory justification lies in the MTO's mandate to ensure all licensed drivers possess the necessary skills and knowledge to operate a vehicle safely on Ontario roads. Ethical considerations demand impartiality and objectivity, preventing personal impressions or the applicant's self-assurance from influencing the evaluation. This method ensures a fair, consistent, and legally defensible assessment. An approach that relies heavily on the applicant's verbal assurances of their driving skill, despite observable hesitations or minor errors, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to uphold the MTO's standards for practical driving competence and prioritizes subjective confidence over objective performance. It creates a significant risk of licensing an inadequately prepared driver, violating the core principle of public safety. Another unacceptable approach is to overlook minor errors because the applicant appears nervous or apologetic. While empathy is important, the licensing process is designed to assess competence under test conditions, which can naturally induce nervousness. Ignoring deviations from the required standards, even if attributed to anxiety, undermines the integrity of the evaluation and compromises safety. The MTO's guidelines do not permit leniency based on emotional state. They require adherence to specific performance benchmarks. Finally, an approach that involves the examiner offering extensive unsolicited advice or coaching during the test in an attempt to help the applicant succeed is also professionally flawed. This blurs the line between examiner and instructor, compromising the objectivity of the assessment. The purpose of the test is to evaluate existing skills, not to teach them. Such behavior could be interpreted as an attempt to manipulate the outcome, which is both unethical and a violation of the MTO's examination protocols. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established regulations and objective assessment criteria. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing the specific requirements of the MTO Driver's Handbook and testing procedures. 2. Maintaining strict impartiality and focusing on observable behaviors and performance against these criteria. 3. Documenting all observations accurately and comprehensively. 4. Recognizing that subjective impressions, while noted, should not override objective evidence of competence or deficiency. 5. Consulting with supervisors or adhering to established protocols when faced with ambiguous situations. Question 7. The evaluation methodology shows that a driver's ability to react safely and appropriately to unexpected road events is paramount. During a practical driving test in Ontario, Canada, a driver is proceeding through a residential area when a pedestrian suddenly steps out from behind a parked car, forcing the driver to brake sharply to avoid a collision. The driver successfully stops the vehicle in time and then proceeds cautiously. How should the examiner evaluate this specific event? Option A. Assess the driver's reaction based on their ability to execute a safe and controlled stop and their subsequent safe resumption of driving, referencing the performance standards outlined in the Ontario Ministry of Transportation Driver's Handbook. Option B. Consider the driver's performance satisfactory because a collision was avoided, regardless of the abruptness of the braking or the driver's subsequent actions. Option C. Evaluate the driver's reaction primarily on the smoothness of the braking, even if it meant the vehicle came closer to the pedestrian than ideal, as long as a collision was averted. Option D. Focus on the pedestrian's action, assuming the driver was reacting to an unavoidable situation and therefore not penalizing any perceived delay in their braking response. The correct answer is A. Assess the driver's reaction based on their ability to execute a safe and controlled stop and their subsequent safe resumption of driving, referencing the performance standards outlined in the Ontario Ministry of Transportation Driver's Handbook. Explanation: the evaluation methodology shows that a driver's ability to navigate complex urban environments is a key indicator of their readiness for independent driving. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the examiner to balance the need for objective assessment with the potential for subjective interpretation of a driver's actions, especially when faced with unexpected events. The examiner must adhere strictly to the established testing protocols of Ontario, Canada, to ensure fairness and consistency. The correct approach involves the examiner meticulously documenting the driver's performance against the official Ontario Ministry of Transportation (MTO) Driver's Handbook criteria. This includes observing the driver's reaction to the pedestrian stepping out, their ability to execute a safe and controlled stop, and their subsequent safe resumption of driving. The examiner must then assess these actions based on the specific performance standards outlined in the MTO Handbook, which prioritizes road safety and adherence to traffic laws. This aligns with the MTO's mandate to ensure all licensed drivers possess the necessary skills and judgment to operate a vehicle safely on Ontario roads. An incorrect approach would be to allow personal feelings or assumptions about the pedestrian's behavior to influence the evaluation. For instance, if the examiner felt the pedestrian was at fault and therefore excused the driver's delayed reaction, this would be a failure to objectively assess the driver's response to a hazard, regardless of its origin. This deviates from the MTO's requirement for standardized and impartial evaluation. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the fact that a collision was avoided, without thoroughly evaluating the driver's technique in doing so. The MTO Handbook emphasizes not just avoiding incidents, but the manner in which hazards are managed, including maintaining control and adhering to safe driving practices throughout the maneuver. Overlooking these details would be a failure to assess the driver's overall competency as required by the MTO. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established regulatory standards and ethical principles. This involves understanding the specific requirements of the testing jurisdiction, Ontario, Canada, maintaining objectivity, and documenting all observations factually. When faced with ambiguous situations, the professional should refer to the official guidelines and, if necessary, seek clarification from supervisory bodies to ensure consistent and fair application of the evaluation criteria. Question 8. The evaluation methodology shows that a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada, is reviewing a client's investment portfolio. The client, Ms. Eleanor Vance, a long-term resident of Ontario, has expressed concerns about the recent volatility in her equity holdings and is seeking advice on how to mitigate potential future losses. She has also mentioned a desire to explore more conservative investment options to preserve her capital. Which of the following approaches best addresses Ms. Vance's situation while adhering to Ontario's regulatory framework? Option A. Advise Ms. Vance to ignore the current market volatility as it is a temporary phase and maintain her existing equity holdings to benefit from potential future market recovery. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of Ms. Vance's current financial situation, investment objectives, and risk tolerance, and then propose a diversified range of suitable investment strategies that address her concerns about volatility and capital preservation, ensuring she fully understands the implications of each option. Option C. Recommend a selection of high-yield, alternative investment funds that offer potential for diversification and higher returns, explaining that these can help offset losses from her current equity holdings. Option D. Immediately reallocate Ms. Vance's entire equity portfolio into government bonds and guaranteed investment certificates to ensure capital preservation and eliminate volatility, as this directly addresses her stated concerns. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of Ms. Vance's current financial situation, investment objectives, and risk tolerance, and then propose a diversified range of suitable investment strategies that address her concerns about volatility and capital preservation, ensuring she fully understands the implications of each option. Explanation: the evaluation methodology shows that a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada, is reviewing a client's investment portfolio. The client, Ms. Eleanor Vance, a long-term resident of Ontario, has expressed concerns about the recent volatility in her equity holdings and is seeking advice on how to mitigate potential future losses. She has also mentioned a desire to explore more conservative investment options to preserve her capital. The advisor must consider the client's stated objectives, risk tolerance, and the regulatory environment governing financial advice in Ontario. This scenario is professionally challenging because the advisor must balance the client's expressed desire for capital preservation and reduced volatility with their fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest. Misinterpreting Ms. Vance's intentions or failing to adequately assess her true risk profile could lead to unsuitable recommendations, potentially resulting in financial harm and regulatory noncompliance. The advisor needs to navigate the nuances of client communication and regulatory requirements under Ontario's securities laws. The best approach involves a comprehensive assessment of Ms. Vance's financial situation, investment objectives, and risk tolerance, followed by a recommendation for suitable investment strategies that align with these factors. This includes clearly documenting the client's stated goals and the advisor's rationale for any proposed changes. The advisor should explain the potential benefits and risks of all recommended options, ensuring Ms. Vance fully understands them before making any decisions. This aligns with the principles of Know Your Client (KIC) and suitability, as mandated by the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) and the Investment Industry Regulatory Organization of Canada (IIROC) rules, which require advisors to act honestly, in good faith, and with a view to the best interests of the client. An incorrect approach would be to immediately shift Ms. Vance's entire portfolio into extremely low-risk, low-return investments solely based on her expressed concern about volatility, without a thorough reevaluation of her overall financial plan and long-term goals. This fails to consider if such a drastic change is truly in her best interest, potentially hindering her ability to meet long-term objectives like retirement planning, and may violate suitability requirements. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss Ms. Vance's concerns about volatility as a temporary market fluctuation and advise her to simply hold her current positions without exploring alternative strategies or discussing her evolving risk perception. This demonstrates a failure to adequately address the client's expressed needs and could be seen as not acting in her best interest, especially if her risk tolerance has genuinely decreased. A further incorrect approach would be to recommend complex, high-fee alternative investments that might offer some diversification, but are not clearly understood by Ms. Vance or demonstrably aligned with her stated goal of capital preservation and reduced volatility. This could be seen as prioritizing advisor compensation over client suitability and could lead to regulatory scrutiny. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with active listening and thorough client discovery. This involves asking probing questions to understand not just stated concerns, but also underlying motivations and long-term aspirations. Following discovery, a detailed analysis of the client's financial profile and risk tolerance is crucial. Recommendations should then be developed, clearly articulating the rationale, potential benefits, risks, and costs of each option, ensuring full client comprehension and informed consent. Documentation of this entire process is paramount for regulatory compliance and professional accountability. Question 9. System analysis indicates that a driver operating a commercial vehicle in Derby, UK, notices a slight but unusual noise from the braking system during a routine pre-drive check for commencing a scheduled delivery. The noise is not severe enough to prevent the vehicle from moving, and the driver believes it might not significantly impact the delivery timeline. Considering the regulatory framework governing roadworthiness in the UK, what is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the driver? Option A. Ignore the noise, attributing it to normal wear and tear, and proceed with the delivery without any further action. Option B. Immediately report the unusual braking noise to the designated company supervisor or maintenance department for assessment before proceeding with the delivery. Option C. Continue with the scheduled delivery as planned, assuming the noise is minor and unlikely to cause immediate safety issues, and report it only after the delivery is completed. Option D. Inform the delivery recipient about the noise and ask if they are comfortable with the driver proceeding with the delivery. The correct answer is B. Immediately report the unusual braking noise to the designated company supervisor or maintenance department for assessment before proceeding with the delivery. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driver in Derby, UK, concerning the proper reporting of a minor vehicle defect that could potentially impact road safety. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need to continue with a scheduled delivery against the regulatory obligation to ensure vehicle roadworthiness and the ethical responsibility to public safety. A driver must exercise sound judgment to determine the appropriate course of action without compromising safety or violating regulations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately reporting the suspected defect to the designated person within the company, as per the requirements of the Road Traffic Act 1988 and associated regulations concerning vehicle maintenance and operator licensing in the UK. This approach ensures that the defect is formally acknowledged, assessed by qualified personnel, and rectified before the vehicle is used further, thereby upholding the duty of care to the public and complying with legal obligations. This proactive reporting mechanism is fundamental to maintaining a safe fleet and demonstrating responsible operation. Incorrect approaches analysis. Failing to report the suspected defect and continuing with the delivery, despite the potential safety implications, constitutes a serious breach of the Road Traffic Act 1988 and the operator's licensing conditions. This action prioritizes commercial expediency over safety and could lead to accidents, penalties for the driver and operator, and damage to the company's reputation. Reporting the defect only after the delivery is completed, even if the vehicle appears to function adequately, is still a failure to adhere to the spirit and letter of the law. The law requires that vehicles be in a condition that does not cause danger or risk of injury. Delaying the report means the vehicle was potentially operated in a non-compliant state for a period, increasing the risk of a breakdown or accident. Assuming the defect is minor and will not affect the delivery without proper assessment is a dangerous assumption. The driver is not qualified to make such a determination, and what appears minor could have significant safety implications, especially under load or during adverse driving conditions. This approach bypasses the necessary safety checks and regulatory compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a safety-first mindset. When a potential defect is identified, the immediate professional response is to halt operations that could be compromised by the defect and report it through the established company procedures. This involves understanding the relevant legislation, e.g., Road Traffic Act 1988 in the UK, the company's internal policies on vehicle maintenance, and the ethical imperative to protect public safety. If unsure, seeking guidance from a supervisor or maintenance personnel is always the correct course of action. Question 10. The evaluation methodology shows a scenario where a client in Ontario, Canada, has invested $10,000 and expects to earn an average annual rate of return of 7% compounded annually for 15 years. What is the projected future value of this investment, and which mathematical approach best represents this growth? Option A. Calculate the future value by simply multiplying the principal by the annual interest rate and adding it to the principal for each year. Option B. Calculate the future value by adding the total simple interest earned over 15 years to the principal, without considering compounding. Option C. Calculate the future value using the compound interest formula, FV equals P, 1 plus R n /, where P is the principal, R is the annual interest rate, and N is the number of years. Option D. Present a range of potential future values based on a broad historical average, without specifying the compounding methodology. The correct answer is C. Calculate the future value using the compound interest formula, FV equals P, 1 plus R n /, where P is the principal, R is the annual interest rate, and N is the number of years. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows a scenario where a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada, is tasked with calculating the potential future value of a client's investment portfolio. The challenge lies in accurately projecting growth, considering varying market conditions, and the impact of compounding interest, while adhering to Ontario's regulatory requirements for financial advice. specifically those governed by the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario, FSRA. Professionals must demonstrate a clear understanding of financial mathematics and the ethical obligation to provide accurate and transparent projections to clients. The best approach involves using the compound interest formula to project the future value, incorporating a realistic average annual rate of return and the number of compounding periods. This method is correct because it directly reflects the mathematical principle of compounding, which is fundamental to investment growth. Ontario's regulatory framework, particularly under the Financial Planners and Financial Advisors Act, mandates that financial advice be provided with honesty, integrity, and competence. Accurate mathematical projections are a cornerstone of competence and transparency, ensuring clients can make informed decisions based on realistic expectations. An incorrect approach would be to simply add the annual interest to the principal each year without considering the effect of interest earning interest. This fails to account for compounding, leading to an underestimation of the future value and a misrepresentation of potential growth. This violates the ethical duty of competence and the regulatory requirement for accurate financial advice. Another incorrect approach would be to use a simple average of historical returns without considering the variability or the compounding effect. While historical data can inform projections, presenting it as a direct, linear growth without acknowledging compounding is mathematically unsound and misleading, potentially violating the duty of care and the FSRA expectations for robust financial planning. A further incorrect approach would be to present a range of highly optimistic future values without a clear methodology or justification, potentially creating unrealistic expectations. This could be seen as a misrepresentation and a failure to act in the client's best interest, contravening both ethical standards and regulatory obligations for fair dealing. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes accuracy, transparency, and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Understanding the client's financial goals and risk tolerance. 2. Selecting appropriate financial models and formulas, like compound interest. 3. Using realistic and justifiable assumptions for rates of return, considering historical data and market outlook. 4. Clearly explaining the methodology and assumptions to the client, including any limitations or potential variability. 5. Adhering to all relevant provincial regulations, such as those enforced by FSRA in Ontario, to ensure advice is competent and in the client's best interest. Question 11. The evaluation methodology shows that a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada, is reviewing a client's investment portfolio. The client, a long-term resident of Ontario, has expressed a strong desire to allocate a significant portion of their assets to highly speculative technology stocks, citing information from online investment forums. The advisor has reservations regarding the client's apparent risk tolerance and the potential for substantial capital depreciation. Considering the regulatory framework in Ontario, which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action for the advisor? Option A. Focus the discussion solely on the potential for high returns from speculative technology stocks to align with the client's expressed interest. Option B. Advise the client against any investment in speculative technology stocks, regardless of their stated interest, due to the inherent risks. Option C. Immediately execute the client's request to invest in speculative technology stocks, as the client has the autonomy to direct their investments. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive suitability assessment to understand the client's financial situation, investment objectives, and risk tolerance, and then recommend an investment strategy that is demonstrably suitable, even if it differs from the client's initial request. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive suitability assessment to understand the client's financial situation, investment objectives, and risk tolerance, and then recommend an investment strategy that is demonstrably suitable, even if it differs from the client's initial request. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada, is reviewing a client's investment portfolio. The client, a long-term resident of Ontario, has expressed a desire to significantly increase their exposure to speculative technology stocks, citing recent market trends and online investment forums as their primary sources of information. The advisor has concerns about the client's risk tolerance, which appears to be misaligned with the proposed aggressive allocation and the potential for significant capital loss. This scenario is professionally challenging because the advisor must balance the client's stated wishes with their fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest. The advisor needs to navigate the potential for a client to make emotionally driven decisions based on incomplete or biased information, which could lead to detrimental financial outcomes. Ontario's regulatory framework, specifically under the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC), and its rules governing conduct for registered individuals, mandates that advisors must ensure investments are suitable for their clients. This includes a thorough understanding of the client's financial situation, investment objectives, risk tolerance, and knowledge of investments. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive suitability assessment that goes beyond simply accepting the client's stated preferences. This approach prioritizes understanding the client's underlying needs and capacity for risk. The advisor should engage in a detailed discussion with the client to explore the rationale behind their desire for speculative investments, probe their understanding of the associated risks, and assess their financial capacity to withstand potential losses. Based on this thorough assessment, the advisor should then recommend an investment strategy that is demonstrably suitable, even if it differs from the client's initial request. This aligns with the OSC's requirements for advisors to act with integrity and diligence, ensuring that recommendations are in the client's best interest and are suitable given their circumstances. An approach that uncritically accepts the client's request to invest heavily in speculative technology stocks without a robust suitability assessment fails to meet regulatory obligations. This is because it neglects the advisor's duty to ensure the investment aligns with the client's actual risk tolerance and financial capacity, potentially exposing the client to undue risk and contravening the principles of client protection mandated by the OSC. Another unacceptable approach would be to dismiss the client's wishes outright without adequate exploration. While the advisor has concerns, a complete disregard for the client's stated objectives, without attempting to understand their motivations or educate them on the risks, can damage the client relationship and may not fully address the client's underlying financial goals. This approach might also be seen as paternalistic and not in line with fostering informed client decision-making. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the potential for high returns without adequately addressing the significant downside risks associated with speculative investments is also professionally unsound. This overlooks the fundamental requirement to ensure the investment is suitable in all aspects, including the client's ability to absorb potential losses, which is a cornerstone of responsible financial advice under Ontario regulations. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a deep understanding of client needs and regulatory requirements. This involves active listening, thorough questioning, objective risk assessment, and transparent communication. When a client's stated preferences conflict with a professional assessment of suitability, the advisor must engage in a dialogue to educate the client, explore alternatives, and ultimately recommend a course of action that is both compliant with regulations and genuinely in the client's best financial interest. Question 12. Strategic planning requires a driving school owner in the province of Ontario, Canada, to consider how to respond to a request from a longtime acquaintance who is preparing for their G2 road test and asks for a special, expedited practice session that would focus on areas they know they struggle with before their official test, implying a desire for preferential treatment. Which of the following responses best upholds the regulatory framework and ethical standards of Ontario's driver testing system? Option A. Advise the acquaintance to focus on self-study and practice with family, as the school cannot offer any special arrangements that deviate from the standard process, thereby avoiding direct engagement with the problematic request. Option B. Suggest a mock test that closely simulates the official G2 road test but is conducted by the school, emphasizing that this is a valuable preparation tool, without explicitly stating it is not an official assessment. Option C. Politely but firmly decline the request, explaining that all candidates must follow the standard testing procedures as mandated by the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, and offer to schedule a standard practice session that adheres to all official guidelines. Option D. Agree to the special practice session, focusing on the requested areas, and assure the acquaintance that this will help them pass the test, while subtly suggesting they mention their familiarity with the school if any issues arise during the official test. The correct answer is C. Politely but firmly decline the request, explaining that all candidates must follow the standard testing procedures as mandated by the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, and offer to schedule a standard practice session that adheres to all official guidelines. Explanation: strategic planning requires a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape to ensure compliance and ethical conduct. In the context of the Derby Driver's Test, which operates under the regulations of the Province of Ontario, Canada, a key challenge for a driving school owner is balancing business objectives with the paramount duty of public safety and adherence to the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and its associated regulations. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a direct conflict between a potential revenue-generating opportunity and the established safety protocols designed to protect all road users. The owner must exercise careful judgment to avoid compromising the integrity of the testing process or violating provincial law. The best approach involves prioritizing the integrity of the testing process and adhering strictly to the official guidelines set forth by the Ontario Ministry of Transportation. This means unequivocally refusing any request that deviates from the established testing procedures, even if it means foregoing a potential financial gain. This approach is correct because it directly upholds the regulatory framework of Ontario, which mandates standardized testing to ensure all drivers meet a minimum competency standard for public safety. Ethically, it aligns with the professional responsibility of a driving school to promote safe driving practices and to act in the best interest of the public, not just its own financial interests. An incorrect approach would be to consider accommodating the request, even with the justification of a quick refresher or special arrangement. This is a regulatory failure because it bypasses the formal testing requirements stipulated by the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, which are designed to be objective and standardized. Ethically, it represents a conflict of interest and a breach of trust, as it suggests preferential treatment that undermines the fairness and validity of the licensing process. Another incorrect approach is to suggest a practice session that closely mimics the test but is not officially sanctioned. Seemingly less egregious, this still falls short of full compliance. It creates a gray area where the individual may gain a false sense of preparedness without undergoing the official assessment, potentially leading to a situation where they are not truly ready for the road. This is a regulatory and ethical failing as it circumvents the spirit and letter of the law, which requires official evaluation. Finally, an approach that involves subtly hinting at ways to prepare for the test outside of official channels, without explicitly agreeing to anything, is also problematic. This can be interpreted as tacit encouragement of circumventing the rules and creates an environment where individuals might feel pressured or misled. It fails to provide clear guidance and upholds neither the regulatory requirements nor ethical standards of transparency and fairness. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core regulatory requirements and ethical obligations. This involves clearly understanding the mandates of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and the Ministry of Transportation's guidelines. When faced with a request that appears to conflict with these, the professional should immediately assess the potential for noncompliance. The default position should always be adherence to the established rules. If a request cannot be fulfilled within the strict confines of the regulations, it must be politely but firmly declined, with a clear explanation of the regulatory constraints. Seeking clarification from the governing body, if ambiguity exists, is also a crucial step in ensuring proper decision-making. Question 13. The evaluation methodology shows that a recent review of the Derby Driver's Test in Ontario has highlighted varying opinions on its effectiveness from different stakeholder groups. Considering the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and its regulations, which approach best addresses these differing perspectives to ensure the test remains a robust measure of driver competency and public safety? Option A. Focus on reducing the difficulty of the Derby Driver's Test to improve pass rates, as a higher pass rate is often perceived by the public as an indicator of a successful and efficient licensing system. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive survey and focus groups with newly licensed drivers, certified driving instructors, and road safety professionals to gather diverse feedback, analyze the data for trends, and propose evidence-based adjustments to the test content and assessment criteria. Option C. Implement minor cosmetic changes to the test format based on the most frequently voiced complaints, without undertaking a thorough analysis of the underlying issues or seeking broader stakeholder input. Option D. Prioritize the feedback from experienced driving instructors who have been teaching for over 20 years, as their long-term observations are likely to be the most accurate indicators of the test's strengths and weaknesses. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive survey and focus groups with newly licensed drivers, certified driving instructors, and road safety professionals to gather diverse feedback, analyze the data for trends, and propose evidence-based adjustments to the test content and assessment criteria. Explanation: the evaluation methodology shows that understanding stakeholder perspectives is crucial for effective driver training and licensing. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs and perceptions of different stakeholders with the overarching goal of public safety and regulatory compliance, as mandated by the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and its associated regulations. The licensing authority has a duty to ensure drivers are competent and safe, while also considering the experiences and feedback of driving instructors and the public. The correct approach involves a systematic and data-driven method to gather feedback from all relevant stakeholders, including newly licensed drivers, experienced instructors, and potentially road safety experts. This feedback should then be analyzed to identify common themes, areas of strength, and specific weaknesses in the current testing and training protocols. The insights gained are used to inform evidence-based revisions to the Derby driver's test curriculum and assessment criteria, ensuring they remain relevant, effective, and aligned with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act's objectives for road safety. This aligns with the regulatory principle of continuous improvement in driver education and licensing. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the anecdotal experiences of a few vocal instructors. Without broader data collection, this fails to represent the full spectrum of feedback and could lead to biased revisions that do not address systemic issues or benefit the majority of new drivers. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize the perceived ease of the test to increase pass rates, without a corresponding increase in demonstrated competency. This would undermine the purpose of the test, which is to ensure drivers are safe and capable, potentially leading to an increase in accidents and contravening the spirit of the Highway Traffic Act. Finally, ignoring feedback altogether and maintaining the status quo, even if there are clear indications of issues, demonstrates a lack of commitment to improving driver safety and regulatory compliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the objectives of the Derby driver's test in relation to public safety and regulatory requirements. This involves identifying all key stakeholders and developing a comprehensive plan for gathering their perspectives. The collected data should then be objectively analyzed, looking for patterns and evidence that support or refute current practices. Decisions regarding test modifications should be based on this analysis, with a clear rationale tied to improved driver competency and adherence to the Ontario Highway Traffic Act. Regular review and adaptation of the evaluation methodology are essential to maintain the effectiveness of the driver testing system. Question 14. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada, is considering how to proceed with a client who has expressed a strong desire for aggressive growth investments, but whose past investment behavior and current anxieties suggest a low tolerance for risk. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory and ethical obligations? Option A. Advise the client that their anxieties indicate they are not suited for growth investments and only present ultra-conservative options, disregarding their stated growth objective. Option B. Proceed with a high-risk investment strategy based on the client's stated desire, assuming they will become accustomed to the volatility over time. Option C. Recommend an aggressive growth portfolio immediately, as the client explicitly stated this as their primary objective, and focus on the potential upside. Option D. Conduct a detailed risk tolerance assessment. Discuss the client's past investment experiences and anxieties, and then present a range of suitable investment options that balance their growth objectives with their demonstrated risk capacity, ensuring they understand the potential outcomes. Correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed risk tolerance assessment. Discuss the client's past investment experiences and anxieties, and then present a range of suitable investment options that balance their growth objectives with their demonstrated risk capacity, ensuring they understand the potential outcomes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada, due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated desire for aggressive growth and their demonstrable risk aversion. as evidenced by their past investment behavior and expressed anxieties. Navigating this discrepancy requires careful judgment to ensure the client's best interests are prioritized, adhering to regulatory obligations and ethical standards. The advisor must balance the client's expressed wishes with their actual capacity and tolerance for risk, avoiding recommendations that could lead to significant financial harm or distress. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive assessment of the client's financial situation, investment objectives, and risk tolerance, followed by a discussion that educates the client on the implications of different investment strategies. This approach, which prioritizes understanding the client's true needs and capacity for risk before making recommendations, aligns with the regulatory requirements for suitability under Ontario's securities legislation and the ethical standards expected of financial advisors. Specifically, advisors have a duty to act in the client's best interest, which includes ensuring that any recommended investments are suitable for the client's circumstances, knowledge, and experience. This involves not just accepting a client's stated goals at face value, but also probing to understand the underlying reasons and potential consequences, and then presenting a balanced view of risks and rewards. Incorrect approach is analysis. Recommending an aggressive growth portfolio solely based on the client's stated desire, without thoroughly exploring their risk tolerance and past behavior, fails to meet the suitability requirements. This approach ignores the potential for significant losses that could cause the client undue stress and financial hardship, violating the duty to act in their best interest. Another unacceptable approach would be to dismiss the client's stated desire for growth entirely and only offer conservative options, as this fails to acknowledge their expressed objectives and could lead to a loss of trust and potentially suboptimal long-term returns if growth is genuinely a reasonable objective. Finally, proceeding with a high-risk strategy without obtaining explicit confirmation from the client that they understand and accept the associated risks, despite their expressed anxiety, would be a serious ethical and regulatory breach. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a thorough client discovery phase. This involves active listening, asking probing questions, and utilizing tools to assess risk tolerance. Following this, advisors should present a range of suitable options, clearly articulating the potential risks and rewards of each, and ensuring the client fully comprehends these implications. The final decision should be a collaborative one, with the client making an informed choice based on a clear understanding of their financial situation and risk profile, and the advisor documenting this process meticulously. Question 15. Benchmark analysis indicates that a client in Ontario who has been a long-term investor with a moderate risk tolerance and a focus on capital preservation is now requesting a significant allocation into a highly speculative, illiquid private equity fund that has a history of high volatility and is outside their established investment profile. The client is insistent, stating they have researched it extensively and believe it will provide exceptional returns. As a registered financial advisor in Ontario, how should you proceed? Option A. Advise the client to seek advice from another financial advisor who may be willing to facilitate such a transaction. Option B. Professionally explain to the client that while their interest is noted, the proposed investment does not align with their established risk tolerance, financial situation, and investment objectives as required by suitability regulations in Ontario, and therefore cannot be recommended or facilitated. Offer to explore alternative investments that better match their profile. Option C. Proceed with facilitating the investment as requested by the client, documenting their insistence to avoid client dissatisfaction and potential loss of business. Option D. Firmly refuse the client's request without further explanation, stating that such investments are not permitted. The correct answer is B. Professionally explain to the client that while their interest is noted, the proposed investment does not align with their established risk tolerance, financial situation, and investment objectives as required by suitability regulations in Ontario, and therefore cannot be recommended or facilitated. Offer to explore alternative investments that better match their profile. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's immediate financial desires and the long-term regulatory obligations of a financial advisor in Ontario. The advisor must navigate the client's pressure while upholding their fiduciary duty and adhering to the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) regulations, specifically those concerning suitability and client best interest. Misjudging this situation could lead to regulatory sanctions, reputational damage, and harm to the client. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly and professionally explaining to the client that while their request is understood, it cannot be accommodated due to regulatory constraints and the advisor's duty to act in the client's best interest. This approach prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. Specifically, under Ontario securities law, advisors have a fundamental obligation to ensure that any investment recommendation or transaction is suitable for the client, taking into account their investment objectives, risk tolerance, financial situation, and knowledge and experience. Directly facilitating a transaction that is demonstrably unsuitable, even at the client's insistence, would violate these principles and potentially contravene OSC Rule 31-103 registration requirements, ongoing registrant obligations. The advisor must educate the client on the risks and regulatory limitations, offering alternative, suitable strategies if available. Incorrect approaches analysis. Facilitating the transaction without further discussion or documentation, despite reservations, would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach ignores the advisor's duty of suitability and could be interpreted as knowingly participating in a transaction that is not in the client's best interest, violating OSC regulations. Pushing back aggressively and refusing to engage with the client's request without providing a clear, regulatory-based explanation would be unprofessional and could damage the client relationship. While the advisor must adhere to regulations, a complete dismissal without explanation is not conducive to professional client management. Suggesting the client seek advice from another advisor solely to avoid the difficult conversation is an abdication of responsibility. The advisor has a duty to provide advice and guidance within their regulatory framework. Transferring the client without a proper understanding of why the request cannot be met is not in the client's best interest and fails to uphold the advisor's professional obligations in Ontario. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a framework that begins with understanding the client's request, followed by a thorough assessment against regulatory requirements and ethical duties. If a conflict arises, the professional must clearly communicate the regulatory and ethical reasons for any limitations, offering alternative solutions where possible. Transparency, education, and a commitment to the client's best interest, as defined by regulatory standards, are paramount. Question 16. The evaluation methodology shows that a financial advisor in Ontario, Canada, is recommending a mutual fund with a higher management expense ratio, MER, and a potential for higher advisor compensation compared to other available options. The advisor believes this fund offers superior long-term growth potential. What is the most appropriate course of action for the advisor to ensure compliance with Ontario's regulatory framework and ethical obligations? Option A. Recommend a lower-cost fund that offers similar but not necessarily superior growth potential to avoid complex discussions about fees and compensation. Option B. Focus the discussion solely on the potential for higher returns, downplaying the significance of the higher MER and the advisor's compensation structure. Option C. Fully disclose the higher MER, potential advisor compensation, and the rationale for believing the fund offers superior growth potential, ensuring the client understands these factors before proceeding with the recommendation. Option D. Proceed with the recommendation, highlighting the potential for superior growth, and assume the client will understand the implications of the higher MER and compensation structure. The correct answer is C. Fully disclose the higher MER, potential advisor compensation, and the rationale for believing the fund offers superior growth potential, ensuring the client understands these factors before proceeding with the recommendation. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows a critical juncture for a financial advisor operating in Ontario, Canada, concerning client disclosure and suitability. The scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest with the practicalities of offering a diverse range of investment products, some of which may have higher associated fees or complexities. Misjudging the disclosure or suitability assessment can lead to significant regulatory breaches and client harm. The correct approach involves a comprehensive and transparent discussion with the client about all relevant product features, including fees, risks, and potential conflicts of interest, before recommending any investment. This aligns with the principles of client-centric advice mandated by the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) and the Investment Industry Regulatory Organization of Canada (IIROC) rules. Specifically, advisors must ensure that any recommendation is suitable for the client's investment objectives, risk tolerance, and financial situation. Full disclosure of fees and potential conflicts is paramount to enabling informed consent and maintaining client trust. This approach prioritizes the client's understanding and well-being above all else. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the recommendation without fully detailing the fee structure and potential conflicts. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for full and frank disclosure, potentially misleading the client about the true cost and implications of the investment. Another incorrect approach is to assume the client understands the implications of higher fees without explicit explanation, which abdicates the advisor's responsibility to ensure suitability and informed decision-making. Finally, focusing solely on the potential for higher returns without adequately addressing the associated risks and costs is a significant ethical and regulatory failing, as it prioritizes potential advisor compensation over the client's best interests. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the client's profile. This includes actively listening to their needs, risk tolerance, and financial goals. Following this, a comprehensive review of available products should be conducted, with a specific focus on how each product aligns with the client's profile and the associated costs and risks. Transparency in communication is key. All material information, including fees, commissions, and potential conflicts of interest, must be clearly and understandably communicated to the client. The final recommendation should be demonstrably in the client's best interest, supported by documentation of the suitability assessment and client consent. Question 17. The evaluation methodology shows that a driver's ability to react to unexpected road events is a key performance indicator for obtaining a driver's license in Ontario. Imagine you are driving on a busy street in Toronto during daylight hours, approaching an intersection with a marked pedestrian crosswalk. A pedestrian is standing at the edge of the sidewalk, looking at their phone, and appears to be about to step into the crosswalk, but has not yet committed. You are traveling at the posted speed limit. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure safety and compliance with traffic regulations? Option A. Swerve into the adjacent lane to go around the pedestrian without reducing your speed. Option B. Maintain your current speed and assume the pedestrian will wait for you to pass. Option C. Slam on your brakes immediately without any prior indication to following traffic. Option D. Gradually reduce your speed, observe the pedestrian's movements closely, and be prepared to stop if they enter the crosswalk, while ensuring your brake lights are clearly visible. The correct answer is D. Gradually reduce your speed, observe the pedestrian's movements closely, and be prepared to stop if they enter the crosswalk, while ensuring your brake lights are clearly visible. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that a driver's ability to navigate complex traffic scenarios is paramount for safe operation on Ontario roads. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the driver to balance immediate safety concerns with the need to adhere to traffic laws and the expectations of other road users, all while under potential stress. The driver must make a rapid, informed decision that minimizes risk to themselves and others. The correct approach involves prioritizing immediate safety by slowing down to a speed that allows for a clear assessment of the situation and a controlled maneuver, while also signaling intent. This aligns with the Ontario Highway Traffic Act's general duty to drive in a safe manner and to yield when necessary. Specifically, by reducing speed, the driver gains crucial reaction time to observe the pedestrian's intentions and the surrounding traffic. Signaling then communicates the driver's intended action to other road users, preventing confusion and potential accidents. This proactive and communicative approach demonstrates responsible driving and adherence to the principles of defensive driving, which are implicitly expected under Ontario's licensing framework. An incorrect approach would be to maintain speed and attempt to beat the pedestrian across the intersection. This disregards the pedestrian's right-of-way and the potential for unpredictable behavior, violating the duty to drive with reasonable care and attention as mandated by the Highway Traffic Act, creates an immediate hazard and shows a lack of consideration for vulnerable road users. Another incorrect approach would be to brake abruptly without signaling. While it might avoid hitting the pedestrian, it creates a significant risk for following vehicles, potentially leading to a rear-end collision. This demonstrates a failure to communicate intentions and a disregard for the safety of other drivers, contravening the expectation of predictable and courteous driving on Ontario roads. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to swerve around the pedestrian without slowing down. This is an extremely dangerous maneuver that could lead to loss of control, collision with other vehicles, or striking the pedestrian. It represents a reckless disregard for safety and a failure to exercise due care and control of the vehicle, a fundamental requirement for any licensed driver in Ontario. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes observation, anticipation, and communication. This involves constantly scanning the environment, anticipating potential hazards like pedestrians near crosswalks, and making proactive decisions to mitigate risks. When faced with uncertainty, the safest course of action, which often involves reducing speed and signaling, should always be chosen. Question 18. Process analysis reveals that a Derby driver in Ontario, Canada, has just completed a fare and has the customer's name and destination from the ride-sharing app. The driver is considering how to best utilize this information. Which of the following actions demonstrates the most responsible and legally compliant approach to handling this customer data? Option A. The driver sends a thank you text message to the customer's phone number, including a promotional offer for a discount on their next ride with Derby. Option B. The driver keeps a personal logbook of all customer names and destinations encountered during their shifts for future reference and to track frequent routes. Option C. The driver uses the customer's name and destination solely for the purpose of completing the current ride, and then discards any temporary notes or mental records of the information once the service is rendered. Option D. The driver shares the customer's name and destination with a friend who also drives for a ride-sharing service, suggesting they might be able to pick up the customer on a future trip. The correct answer is C. The driver uses the customer's name and destination solely for the purpose of completing the current ride, and then discards any temporary notes or mental records of the information once the service is rendered. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Derby driver regarding the proper handling of a customer's personal information and the potential for misuse or unauthorized access. The driver must balance the need for efficient service with the strict data protection regulations in place in Ontario, Canada. The core of the challenge lies in understanding the scope of personal information and the obligations associated with its collection, use, and disclosure. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the driver recognizing that the customer's name and destination constitute personal information under Ontario's Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, PIPEDA, and provincial privacy laws. Therefore, the driver should only use this information for the direct purpose of providing the requested transportation service. This means not sharing it with anyone else, not storing it unnecessarily, and certainly not using it for any other purpose, such as personal contact or marketing. This approach aligns with the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation enshrined in privacy legislation, ensuring that personal information is protected and used only as authorized by the individual. Incorrect approaches analysis. Using the customer's name and destination to send a thank you text message with a promotional offer for future rides is a regulatory failure. This constitutes an unauthorized use and disclosure of personal information. PIPEDA and Ontario's privacy laws require explicit consent for secondary uses of personal information, especially for marketing purposes. The driver has not obtained such consent. Sharing the customer's name and destination with a friend who also drives for a ride-sharing service, even with the intention of helping them find potential fares, is also a significant regulatory and ethical breach. This is an unauthorized disclosure of personal information to a third party without the customer's consent. It violates the principle of confidentiality and the duty to protect customer data. Keeping a personal logbook of customer names and destinations for future reference, even if not explicitly for marketing, is problematic. While not as severe as direct disclosure, it represents unnecessary data retention and a potential for future misuse or breach. Privacy laws generally encourage data minimization and prompt deletion of information when it is no longer needed for its original purpose. Professional reasoning. Professionals in service industries, particularly those handling personal data, must adopt a proactive and compliant mindset. This involves understanding the relevant privacy legislation. In this case, PIPEDA and Ontario's provincial privacy laws, and its implications for daily operations. A robust decision-making process would involve 1. Identifying personal information, recognizing what constitutes personal information under the law. 2. Purpose limitation, understanding the specific purpose for which the information was collected and ensuring it is used only for that purpose. 3. Consent, always seeking explicit consent for any use or disclosure beyond the primary service. 4. Data minimization and retention, collecting only what is necessary and deleting information when it is no longer required. 5. Confidentiality, treating all customer information with the utmost discretion. Question 19. Quality control measures reveal that a driver in Ontario, Canada, has received an official notification from the Ministry of Transportation regarding a potential demerit point accumulation. Which of the following actions best represents a responsible and compliant response to this notification? Option A. Carefully review the official notification from the Ontario Ministry of Transportation to understand the alleged infraction, demerit points, and effective date. Option B. Immediately contact a lawyer to contest the charge without reviewing the notification details. Option C. Ignore the notification, assuming it is a minor issue that will not impact their driving record. Option D. Discuss the alleged infraction with fellow drivers and on online forums to gather opinions. The correct answer is A. Carefully review the official notification from the Ontario Ministry of Transportation to understand the alleged infraction, demerit points, and effective date. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driver in Ontario, Canada, who has received a notification of a potential demerit point accumulation. The challenge lies in understanding the implications of this notification within the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and the Ministry of Transportation's demerit point system, and in determining the appropriate course of action to protect their driving privileges. Misinterpreting the notification or failing to act promptly could lead to significant consequences, including license suspension. Careful judgment is required to navigate the administrative process and ensure compliance. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately reviewing the official notification from the Ontario Ministry of Transportation to confirm the alleged infraction, the associated demerit points, and the effective date. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the official communication and allows for an informed decision based on factual information provided by the governing body. The Ontario Highway Traffic Act and associated regulations outline specific procedures for contesting charges or accepting penalties, and understanding the details of the notification is the foundational step in this process. This aligns with the ethical obligation to be aware of and comply with traffic laws and administrative requirements. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to disregard the notification, assuming it is a minor issue or will resolve itself. This is professionally unacceptable, as it ignores a formal communication from the Ministry of Transportation, potentially leading to missed deadlines for contesting the charge or paying fines, and ultimately resulting in a default judgment and further demerit points. Another incorrect approach is to immediately contact a lawyer without first reviewing the notification. While legal counsel may be necessary, this premature action bypasses the crucial step of understanding the specifics of the alleged infraction and demerit point accumulation as presented by the ministry, which could lead to unnecessary costs and a less informed legal strategy. A third incorrect approach is to discuss the alleged infraction with other drivers or on social media. This is professionally unacceptable as it is irrelevant to the official administrative process, does not provide any factual basis for action, and could potentially be misconstrued or used against the driver in a formal proceeding. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should adopt a systematic decision-making process. First, they must acknowledge and treat all official communications from regulatory bodies with seriousness. Second, they should gather all relevant documentation and information provided by the authority. Third, they should understand the specific regulations governing the situation, in this case, the Ontario Highway Traffic Act and demerit point system. Fourth, they should evaluate their options based on the facts and regulations, which may include seeking professional advice if the situation warrants it. Finally, they must act within the prescribed timelines to ensure compliance and protect their interests. Question 20. The monitoring system demonstrates a consistent 0, 0.05% discrepancy between recorded client portfolio values and actual market valuations for a specific group of high net worth clients in Ontario over the past quarter. If the total value of these client portfolios is $500,000, and assuming this discrepancy represents a consistent underreporting of gains or overstatement of losses, what is the total potential financial impact of this discrepancy over the 3-month period? Option A, $250,000. Option B, $750,000. Option C, $500,000. Option D, $1,500,000. The correct answer is B, $750,000. Explanation: the monitoring system demonstrates a potential for financial misconduct, making this scenario professionally challenging due to the need to balance regulatory compliance with the protection of client assets. The core challenge lies in accurately identifying and quantifying any discrepancies that could indicate unauthorized trading or misallocation of funds, while also ensuring that any actions taken are proportionate and legally sound within the framework of Ontario securities regulations. The best approach involves a meticulous, data-driven investigation that adheres strictly to the Ontario Securities Commission (OSC) rules regarding client asset protection and record keeping. This includes immediately flagging the anomaly for internal review, cross-referencing transaction records with client statements, and calculating the precise financial impact of the observed deviation. This method is correct because it prioritizes the OSC's mandate to protect investors by ensuring that any potential breaches of trust or regulatory violations are identified and addressed promptly and accurately. It aligns with the principles of due diligence and fiduciary duty inherent in managing client accounts under Ontario law. An approach that involves overlooking the discrepancy due to its perceived minor nature is incorrect because it violates the OSC's stringent requirements for oversight and the prevention of financial irregularities. Even small deviations, if systemic, can escalate into significant losses for clients and constitute a breach of regulatory obligations. Furthermore, failing to investigate thoroughly could lead to accusations of negligence or complicity, undermining client trust and the firm's reputation. Another incorrect approach is to immediately report the anomaly to external authorities without first conducting a thorough internal investigation. While transparency is important, premature external reporting without a clear understanding of the facts can lead to unnecessary alarm, reputational damage, and potential legal complications if the discrepancy is later found to be a clerical error or a misunderstanding of trading patterns. Ontario regulations emphasize a structured internal process for addressing such issues before escalating them, ensuring that investigations are fact-based and efficient. Finally, an approach that involves adjusting client statements to match the monitoring system's output without investigating the root cause is fundamentally unethical and illegal. This constitutes falsification of records, a severe violation of OSC regulations and criminal law, designed to conceal misconduct rather than rectify it. It directly contravenes the principles of honesty and integrity expected of all registered individuals and firms in Ontario. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a presumption of accuracy in their monitoring systems, but immediately triggers a robust investigation protocol when anomalies are detected. This protocol should involve data verification, calculation of financial impact, consultation with relevant internal departments, e.g., compliance, operations, and adherence to established reporting timelines. The process should be guided by a commitment to regulatory compliance, client protection, and ethical conduct, ensuring that all actions are documented and justifiable.